She clutched the letter like it was life itself. Every bump of the train rattled her bones, but it was the silence of not knowing that rattled her soul. She had left everything behind for a man she'd never seen, only to find his wedding ring resting on the wrong hand. The train screamed through the wide lands of Wyoming. It was early spring, but the wind was still sharp like a blade. Miss Temperance Wilkes sat with gloved hands in her lap and a hat pulled low to shield her eyes. She had not slept well in days. Her letter, a creased and worn one, was folded in her coat pocket. She had read it 100 times. It was from a man named Ephraim Carter, a rancher out in the dry plains near Larkspur Ridge. He had written in clean, careful words. He spoke of needing a wife, of needing help on his land, of wanting kindness more than beauty. Temperance had cried the first time she read it. Not out of sadness but out of hope, a rare thing in her life. She was 28, a seamstress, and not considered fine to look at, as one woman once said. But she had a good mind, strong arms, and a heart that longed to be chosen. Ephraim had written, "I am not a rich man but I am an honest one. If you can cook and don't mind dust, I reckon we could build a good life." Temperance had no kin left. Only a broken life in Missouri. So she sold her sewing machine, packed her few things and bought a train ticket west. Now she was nearing the end of that journey. When the conductor called, "Larkspur Ridge," she stood up, heart pounding. She grabbed her brown satchel and stepped down into the sunlight. The platform was near empty. The wind smelled like dust and old pine. A child's dog barked somewhere but no one called her name. She waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. A man passed by in a black coat, glancing at her. Then an older woman with 2 hens in a cage. No one seemed to be looking for a bride. She looked again at the letter. "I will meet you on the platform with a red kerchief in my coat pocket." Her eyes scanned every coat, every man. Then she saw something. A woman, tall, with pale yellow hair tied back in a tight bun, was talking to a man by the wagon post. The man wore work boots and his coat was brown suede. She couldn't see his face, but something about the shape of his shoulders made her pause. The woman reached for his hand. Temperance's heart skipped. That's when she saw it. A wedding ring. A thick silver band. Just like the one Ephraim described in his letter. The woman holding his hand laughed. She leaned in close. Her voice was too far to hear, but the message was clear. The man was married. Temperance stepped back, her boots heavy on the wooden boards. Her mouth went dry. Was she too late? Or had he lied? She took a deep breath and turned away, clutching the letter harder than ever. But God wasn't finished with her story yet. Not by a long mile. She had come for one man, but it was another who spoke her name with gentle strength. And in that moment, lost and alone on the edge of town, her story began to change, not with romance but with kindness. Temperance didn't know where to go. The train had long since pulled away. The people on the platform had drifted off, and the wind had grown colder. Her satchel was heavy and her heart was heavier still. She walked past the general store and down a dirt lane. Every little sound felt sharp in her ears. Children laughing, a cow lowing somewhere, a wagon creaking over the stones. She had no family. No home to return to. And now no husband to meet her. "Lord," she whispered under her breath, "did I hear you wrong?" The wind didn't answer, but her steps kept moving. That's when she heard it. "Miss Wilkes?" She turned fast. A tall man stood just behind her, his hat in his hands. He had kind eyes, brown like the earth, and a soft, steady voice. "Miss Temperance Wilkes?" he asked again, careful with her name. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." He gave a small smile. "Name's Amos LeClaire. I work at the Carter place. Ephraim told me to look for you, but you came earlier than we expected." She stared at him. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Amos looked down for a second, then said quietly, "You saw the woman with the ring." Temperance gave a small, broken nod. "I know it looks bad," he said gently. "But Ephraim didn't marry her. He never got the chance." She swallowed hard. "Then where is he?" Amos paused. He looked over his shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. Then he motioned down the road. "Come with me," he said. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Temperance hesitated. She didn't know this man. She had nothing but her satchel and her name. But somehow, when she looked in Amos's eyes, she didn't feel afraid. She felt steady. So she followed him. They walked in silence past the edge of town. The trees grew taller. The road turned rough. After about a mile, they came to a narrow trail leading up a small hill. On top sat a lonely little cabin, barely finished. One window still didn't have glass. The porch boards were unpainted. "This is it," Amos said, pushing the door open. "Ephraim started building it for you. He wanted to make it nice, but—" He stopped. Temperance stepped inside. The place smelled of sawdust and hope. A small iron stove sat in the corner. A quilt half-folded rested on the bed. On the table was a Bible. She walked closer and opened the front cover. There was her name. Temperance Wilkes Carter. Written in ink in Ephraim's own hand. Her knees felt weak. "Where is he?" she asked again, her voice trembling. Amos rubbed the back of his neck. "He left town 5 days ago. Said he needed to make a trade with some men out near the canyon road. Folks said they were cattle buyers, but something about them didn't sit right." Temperance blinked. "Did he tell anyone where he was going exactly?" "No," Amos said. "And he hasn't come back since." Temperance sat down on the edge of the bed. Her hands shook. Amos stood in the doorway, quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, "I don't know what's happened to him. But I don't believe he meant to deceive you." Temperance looked up. "And I don't believe God would bring you this far," Amos added, "just to leave you now." She didn't answer. But she did hold the Bible close. She had come for Ephraim Carter. But God had brought her here for something deeper. She had stepped into the house meant to be hers, but the silence inside whispered of secrets. And though her name was written in the Bible on the table, the man who wrote it was nowhere to be found. The cabin was small but strong. The floorboards creaked as Temperance walked around. Her fingers brushed the wood frame of the bed, plain and handmade. She touched the stove, cold now but still smelling faintly of smoke and ash. Ephraim had lit it once. Maybe while dreaming of her arrival. Amos stood by the door, quiet. He didn't rush her. He watched, kindly, with his hat still in hand. "There's a bucket at the well," he said after a while. "And some beans in the pantry. I'll bring you bread come morning if you plan to stay." Temperance nodded, unsure of anything but the need to sit down and think. She hadn't eaten all day but hunger felt far away. "Thank you," she whispered. "For not leaving me." Amos gave a nod. "It's what decent folks do." He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. She watched from the window as he walked back down the trail toward town, his long frame fading into the dust and trees. She was alone now. Just her, and a house not yet made into a home. She opened the Bible again. There in careful ink was her name, Temperance Wilkes Carter. She ran her fingers over it. Why would he write this, and then disappear? She thought. Her eyes wandered. She opened a drawer near the table. Inside were nails, a hammer, a few coins wrapped in cloth and a second envelope. She pulled it out. There was no name on the outside. She opened it slowly. Inside was a half-written letter. The ink had smudged. It looked rushed. "If something happens to me before she arrives, tell her I'm sorry. I tried to make things right. I never wanted her to walk into this alone." The rest of the words were too faint to read. Temperance pressed the letter to her chest. What had Ephraim done? Outside, the sun began to set, turning the sky soft orange and pale pink. Shadows stretched long across the cabin floor. The wind whistled through the window cracks. She lit a small lamp with the matchstick she found near the stove. The flame flickered, making the little room glow gold and warm. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the quilt over her lap and began to pray. "Lord, I don't know where he is. I don't know why I'm here. But I trust you do." Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed open. She hadn't come to this place by accident. And even though the house was unfinished, the ring was on the wrong hand and the man was missing. God was not. He was here. In the stillness. In the mystery. In the waiting. And something told her this was only the beginning. She woke to silence, but the land outside was whispering. There were tracks in the dust that led away from the house, and into a mystery that only faith and courage could follow. The morning came soft and slow. Temperance woke before the sun rose. The room was still gray, the kind of gray that comes before color. She had slept little, tossing and turning in a bed that didn't yet feel like hers. The quilt was warm, but her thoughts had been cold. Full of questions. She knelt beside the bed and prayed again. Just a whisper this time. Then she lit the stove and boiled a bit of water. There was no tea, only clean water and leftover beans. She ate in silence, her eyes drawn to the Bible on the table and the half-letter still tucked inside. The wind outside had changed. It no longer blew wild, it was still, like the land was holding its breath. She opened the cabin door. And that's when she saw it. Tracks. Boot tracks. Wagon wheels. Scrapes along the ground. They weren't fresh but not old either. Maybe a few days at most. She stepped outside, holding her shawl tight around her shoulders. The wind brushed her face gently. Her boots pressed into the same dust where Ephraim had once walked. And then, she saw something odd. A torn piece of red cloth caught on the side of a fence post. It fluttered, stuck between two nails. She stepped closer and gently pulled it free. It looked like part of a kerchief. Red. Just like the one Ephraim had said he would wear. Her heart pounded. That was when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned fast. It was Amos. He looked surprised to see her up so early. "You found something," he said, eyes going to the cloth in her hand. Temperance nodded, lifting it slowly. It was caught there, near the edge of the trail. Amos took it from her, turning it in his hands. His brow furrowed. "He always carried this. Said his mother gave it to him before she passed." Temperance stepped closer. "You said he was going to meet some men?" Amos nodded. "Yes. Out by Dry Hollow. A half-day's ride north. Can you take me there?" He looked at her, unsure. "It ain't safe for a woman out that way," he said quietly. "But it wasn't safe for Ephraim either," she replied. "And I didn't come this far to sit and do nothing." Amos didn't speak for a long moment. Then he gave one nod. "All right," he said. "I'll saddle the mule." By mid-morning they were riding through the open hills. The sun was out now, clear and bright, and the land stretched wide like a painting. Temperance rode behind Amos on the old mule, arms wrapped gently around his middle. She had never been on a horse or mule before, but she held on steady. They passed groves of pine and small streams, and wild deer that ran when they heard them coming. Then just past a ridge Amos pointed. "There," he said. "Dry Hollow." It was a stretch of land with low rocks, brush, and a small cave up in the side of the hill. They dismounted quietly. Amos led the way. There were old boot prints, scattered ashes from a fire, and something half buried near the cave entrance. Temperance knelt down and pulled it loose. It was the back half of Ephraim's letter. The part that had gone missing. She read the last words aloud, slowly, trembling. "I don't trust them. But I need the money to finish the cabin. If I don't make it home, tell her I was trying to make a place for her. Tell her I didn't mean for her to be alone." Tears ran down Temperance's cheeks. Amos knelt beside her, removing his hat. "I think something happened here," he said gently. Temperance nodded. But in her heart she felt something else. He was still alive. Somewhere. She could feel it. And she wasn't going to stop looking. The woman who wore the ring had once worn Ephraim's promises too. But when truth was finally spoken between two hurting women, it was not jealousy that rose, but mercy. The town of Larkspur Ridge was quiet that afternoon. Temperance and Amos rode slowly down the lane, dust rising behind the mule's tired steps. The letter in her hands felt heavier than it looked. Every word Ephraim had written echoed in her heart. He had been trying to build her a home. He had been trying to keep her safe. And now he was missing. But one thing still burned in her mind, the woman with the ring. That ring was meant for Temperance. Ephraim had said so in every letter. So how had it ended up on another woman's hand? Amos stopped outside a small house near the edge of town. "She lives here," he said, voice low. "Her name's Lorna. Lorna Bailey. She was Ephraim's friend. From long before he sent for you." Temperance's hands tightened around her shawl. "I need to speak with her," she whispered. "I'll wait here," Amos said kindly. "If you need anything, just call." Temperance nodded and walked up the steps. The door opened before she even knocked. Lorna stood there, tall and lovely, with soft brown hair and a green dress that hugged her slender shape. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. "You're her?" Lorna said. "Not angry. Just tired." Temperance nodded. "I'm Temperance Wilkes. Ephraim's, well, I was meant to be his bride." Lorna looked away. "I know." She stepped back and motioned her inside. The home was neat and quiet. A single chair by the window. A sewing basket. A photograph of Lorna's family on the wall. "I never meant to hurt you," Lorna said softly. "I didn't even know he was writing to someone until after he left." Temperance looked at her. "Then, why were you wearing the ring?" Lorna gave a sad smile. "Because I wanted to believe he still loved me. Even after all the years and all the silence." She pulled the ring off her finger and set it gently on the table between them. "He gave me this ring 2 years ago," she said. "Before he changed. Before he found God." Temperance blinked. Lorna continued. "We were going to marry once. But I broke it off. I wanted more money, more life than he could offer. I chased something else. And when I came back he had turned quiet. Different. He talked about faith, about starting over. About a woman named Temperance." Tears filled Temperance's eyes. "He told me he'd made a promise to you," Lorna said. Said you were a woman of strength and kindness. That you were what he'd prayed for. I was jealous. I told him I still loved him. She picked up the ring and stared at it. He didn't say it back. Silence filled the room. Then Lorna walked over, took Temperance's hand and pressed the ring into her palm. This belongs to you, she whispered. And if you find him, tell him I forgive him. And I forgive myself. Temperance didn't know what to say. So she nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Sometimes healing began not in loud words, but in quiet understanding. And sometimes two women who had loved the same man could find peace instead of bitterness. As she stepped outside, Amos looked up quickly. Well? Temperance didn't speak right away. She opened her hand and showed him the ring. Let's find him, she said. And Amos gave the smallest smile. Yes, ma'am. They rode out again into the fading light. Temperance no longer carried just a name and a letter. She carried hope. And now, the truth. The storm came fast and fierce. But inside the darkness, a light was waiting. And when hope flickered low, the hand that helped her stand wasn't the one she expected, but the one God had placed in her path. The sky turned dark before evening. Thunder rumbled low in the hills, and heavy clouds rolled across the wide sky. Temperance and Amos were still on the trail, riding north toward the canyon road, the last place Ephraim was seen. The mule grew nervous, its steps slower. Temperance clutched the saddle tighter. Her dress was already dust-stained, and her shawl pulled tight around her arms. The ring now rested on a string around her neck under her blouse, close to her heart. We need shelter, Amos said, looking up at the sky. Storm's coming faster than I thought. They turned off the main trail and followed a small path through a grove of trees. The branches swayed, leaves rustling like warning whispers. The wind picked up. Then, like a gift, a small wooden barn came into view. Abandoned. But strong. Let's wait it out here, Amos said. They led the mule inside and shut the door just before the rain came, hard and cold, pounding the roof like hammers. Temperance lit a small candle from the matches she carried. The barn smelled of hay and old wood. It was dry inside, but the wind howled through the cracks. She sat down on a blanket of straw, the candle flickering beside her. Amos stayed near the door, standing watch like a guard. But after a while he came and sat across from her. You've been strong, he said, his voice soft over the storm. Temperance gave a small smile. I haven't felt strong. He nodded. Still, you came. You didn't give up. That counts for something. She looked at him for a moment. Why are you helping me? She asked. Amos looked into the candlelight. Because I knew Ephraim. And I knew what kind of man he was becoming. He wanted to be good. Wanted to do right. And you were part of that. He paused. But also, he added quieter, because I know what it's like to be left behind. Temperance tilted her head. My wife died 3 winters ago, Amos said, not looking at her. Fever took her. Quick. We had no children. Just the land and each other. After she was gone, I stopped talking to folks. Stopped living, really. Until Ephraim came along and asked me to help him build a house for a woman he hadn't even met. Temperance blinked. I thought he was a fool, Amos said with a little laugh. But I helped anyway. And I started praying again for the first time in years. Not for myself, but for that woman. For you. A tear slipped down Temperance's cheek. I didn't expect you to be so kind, she whispered. I didn't expect you to still be standing, Amos said. For a long while they said nothing. The storm roared on outside, but inside the barn the candle stayed steady. Its light soft, unmoving. And in that quiet space, something gentle passed between them. Not romance, not yet. But trust. Built slow. Like the cabin on the hill. Like a heart learning to open again. Sometimes the answers we search for are buried behind closed doors. But when she knocked on the sheriff's door, what she found was not justice, but a secret that changed everything. The storm passed by morning. The world outside the barn was fresh and wet, with water dripping from the pine branches and soft mud on the trail. The mule shook the rain from its coat as Amos saddled it again. Temperance wrapped her shawl tighter. Her eyes were tired but alert. They had spent the night with only the candle and their quiet prayers. I need to speak to the sheriff, she said. Amos gave a slow nod. They rode back into town where the main street was still empty, except for a boy sweeping the porch of the general store. A few folks waved but most just stared. Whispers followed Temperance now. That's the mail-order bride. The one with no husband. The sheriff's office stood near the end of the street. A wooden sign creaked in the breeze above the door. The windows were dusty. Inside, a single chair and a worn desk sat in the middle of the room. Sheriff Carver was behind it. A tall man with gray hair, a sharp mustache, and a rifle resting on the wall behind him. Temperance stepped in, chin lifted. The sheriff looked up from his papers. "You must be Miss Wilkes," he said. "I am." He gave a slow nod. "I heard you arrived. I'm sorry about Ephraim." "Good man." Temperance stepped closer. "You said he was good. Then why didn't anyone look for him when he went missing?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed just a little. "Folks disappear sometimes. Out west it ain't always foul play. Could have been a bear. Could have been bandits. But he left letters," she said. "He told people where he was going. Amos told me." The sheriff leaned back. "And what do you think happened, ma'am?" "I think someone wanted him gone." The room went quiet. The sheriff stood and walked to the back shelf, pulling out a small metal tin. He set it on the desk and opened it. Inside were a few belongings. Temperance gasped. Ephraim's Bible. His red kerchief. A broken pocket watch. "He was found," she whispered. The sheriff didn't meet her eyes. "3 days ago. But we weren't sure it was him. No body. Just these things. Left near the canyon pass." Temperance felt her knees weaken. "He's alive," she said softly. "Or someone wants you to think he is," the sheriff replied. Amos stepped forward now. "Why didn't you tell her right away?" The sheriff closed the tin. "Because I don't like raising hope without truth. And I ain't sure what the truth is yet." Temperance stared at the items. "Can I take these?" she asked. The sheriff hesitated, then gave a slow nod. She took the tin in her arms like it held gold. "Miss Wilkes," the sheriff added, "you seem like a strong woman. But be careful. Some things out here, they don't end the way you want them to." Temperance looked him in the eyes. "I don't need it to end my way," she said. "I just need the truth." Outside, the sun was high now, drying the muddy street. She and Amos walked in silence. Then Temperance spoke. "He wasn't just lost. Someone left those things on purpose." "Could be a warning," Amos said. "Or a trail," she whispered. "One he left for me." Amos paused. "Where does the trail go next?" Temperance looked up toward the ridge. "To the old cabin by the river," she said. "He mentioned it once in a letter. Said it was where he went when he needed to be alone. And so they turned again. Not homeward, but onward. Because sometimes love doesn't wait at the front door, it hides just beyond the edge of fear. The river didn't just carry water, it carried memories. And in the silence of the trees, where the world held its breath, she found what he left behind, and what his heart had never stopped hoping for. The trail to the old cabin was narrow and overgrown. Branches brushed against Temperance's arms as the mule pushed forward. Amos rode beside her, quiet and watchful, eyes scanning the woods. They followed the river's bend, just as Ephraim had described in one of his letters, a place where the trees open like arms and the water sings low. It was almost evening when they found it. A small log cabin sat tucked beneath a row of pines. The roof was patched with bark. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The door hung crooked. It looked forgotten. But not empty. Temperance stepped down first. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked to the door. She didn't knock. She just pushed it open. The room inside was dusty but not ruined. A table stood in the center with a folded cloth. A tin cup. And beside it an open Bible. On the wall hung a coat, Ephraim's coat. Temperance walked in slowly, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. "He's been here," she whispered. Amos followed, looking around carefully. He opened a cupboard. Found dried beans. A cracked plate. Nothing looked stolen. But something felt unfinished. Then Temperance saw it. A small wooden box tucked under the bed. She knelt and pulled it out. Inside were papers, letters. Her letters. All of them. Folded neatly, tied with a string. And on top, a drawing. A sketch of her face, just as she'd described herself. With her braid, her strong arms, and the cross she always wore. Tears filled her eyes. "He believed in me," she whispered. He was waiting. Amos was quiet. He looked at the floor, then toward the window. "Someone's been watching this place," he said suddenly. Temperance stood. "What?" Amos pointed out the back window. "Tracks. Not from an animal. Boots. Fresh." He opened the back door and stepped outside. Temperance followed. The forest behind the cabin was still. But the trail led deeper into the trees. 2 sets of footprints. One was heavy. The other lighter. Limping. She looked at Amos. "He's alive," she said. "But someone's got him." Amos looked grim. "Or he's running from something," Temperance didn't hesitate. We follow. Amos nodded. I'll go ahead. You stay behind me. If there's trouble? I'm not leaving, she said firmly. So they followed the prince, step by step, towards something neither of them could name. Not yet. But every step felt like the turning of a page. And God, who had watched every tear and counted every breath, was guiding their feet, even now. She had come all this way for a man she barely knew. But when she finally heard his voice again, broken, quiet, and full of sorrow, it wasn't the reunion she had imagined. It was deeper. It was holy. The woods were thick and quiet. Temperance and Amos moved carefully along the narrow path, following the footprints through pine needles and fallen leaves. The sky had turned pale with twilight, and the river's song could still be heard in the distance. Every few steps, Temperance looked behind her. But no one followed. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The trail led them to a small rocky ledge above a creek. There, half hidden by brambles, was a cave, just wide enough for a man to crawl inside. Amos raised his hand. He moved forward, crouching low. He peeked inside. Then he turned back to Temperance, eyes wide with something between surprise and sorrow. He's in there, he whispered. Temperance's heart leapt. Without waiting, she dropped to her knees and crawled into the dark. The air was cool and still. The smell of damp stone filled her nose. And then she heard it. A cough. Oh, ragged. Ephraim, she said, her voice shaking. Ephraim, it's me. Temperance. Silence. Then a soft reply. Temperance? Her hand covered her mouth. Tears poured freely. She inched closer until she could see him. He was lying on a pile of rough blankets. His beard was longer, his clothes torn. One leg was wrapped in cloth, bloody. His face was pale and his eyes sunken, but they still held the same fire. I thought I was dreaming, he whispered. She reached out and touched his hand. You're not. I came. I never stopped coming. His hand closed around hers, weak but warm. I tried to get back, he said. But I was followed. Someone didn't want me to return. I got hurt in the canyon. Been hiding ever since. Why didn't you send for help? She asked, her voice cracking. He looked down. I didn't want to bring danger to you. Temperance leaned close, tears falling onto his shirt. You are my husband, she said softly. You were worth the danger. He looked at her, then at the ring hanging from her neck. You found her, he said. Lorna. She gave this back to me, Temperance whispered, and said she forgave you. And herself. Ephraim closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. I prayed God would send you, he said. I didn't know if he still listened. He listened, she said. Even when we were both silent. Behind them, Amos called gently from the cave entrance. We've got to move him. It's not safe here. Temperance looked at Ephraim. Can you stand? She asked. With you, he whispered. I'll try. So they helped him out, slowly, carefully. Amos carried most of his weight. And as they stepped back into the fading light, Ephraim's arm around Temperance's shoulders, she looked up at the darkening sky. The stars were coming out, one by one. Each one like a promise kept. Each one like grace undeserved. He had been lost. She had been rejected. But when God brought them back to each other, it wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the proof that love had been there all along, waiting, praying, holding on. The journey back to town was slow. Ephraim leaned on Amos and Temperance, his legs still weak, his steps heavy. But every mile felt like a miracle. Every mile was one he hadn't expected to walk again. And Temperance, she never let go of his hand. When they reached the edge of the town, the sun was rising behind them. The rooftops glowed gold. The wind was gentle. The people stared as they passed, first in silence, then with whispers, then with awe. Is that him? He's alive. She brought him back. Sheriff Carver met them near the general store. His eyes widened when he saw Ephraim, limping, bruised, but standing. I thought you were gone, the sheriff said softly. I thought so too, Ephraim replied. But God wasn't done with me. They made their way to the church. It was quiet and open. No one was inside yet. Morning light poured through the tall windows. Temperance helped Ephraim sit in the front pew. Then she knelt. Right there, in the place where broken hearts come home. She didn't ask God for anything. She just said, thank you. Ephraim bowed his head beside her. I was ashamed, he whispered. About my past. About the ring I gave to someone else. Temperance looked at him. But you came back, she said. You still had the strength to love. That's what matters. He looked at her with tears in his eyes. Do you still want to be my wife? Temperance smiled. I already am. In heart, in prayer, and in every step I took to find you. He reached into his coat pocket, shaky hands, slow movements, and pulled out something small. A new ring. Rough, simple, and made. I carved this in the cave, he said. I thought, if God ever let me see you again. She held out her hand. He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. Not because it was the right size, but because it was meant for her. Amos stood in the back watching. He tipped his hat. Then quietly stepped outside, letting them have their moment. The next Sunday the church was full. Ephraim stood at the front, with a cane in one hand and Temperance's hand in the other. Pastor Goodwin read from the book of Ruth. Where you go I will go. Where you stay I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God my God. They said their vows, not as strangers, not as desperate souls clinging to hope, but as two people who had walked through fire and found God's mercy on the other side. And when he kissed her, the town cheered. Some wept. Some smiled through tears. Because what they saw wasn't just a wedding. It was a testimony. Of love that waits. Of faith that doesn't break. Of a bride who refused to turn back, and a man who prayed she would find him. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, please tap like, leave a kind comment, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more emotional Christian love stories full of grace, faith, and hope. May your heart always trust God's timing. And may your love story like this one shine in every storm.